firstly, I want to introduce Aimée Felone, who is co-founder of Nights Of, a commercial children's publisher whose main focus is publishing inclusively by commissioning writers and illustrators from a diverse range of backgrounds, as well as hiring diversely. At Nights Of, she has opened Brixton's only children's bookshop, Roundtable Books, which is fantastic. It's just a treat, even visually, stocking titles from underrepresented authors and illustrators. Writers include Shana Jackson, who, if you haven't heard, I will now tell you, has just won the Waterstones Children's Book Prize 2020 for High Rise Mystery. Whoop, whoop. Yeah. Okay, next, Valerie Branders is the founder and award-winning inclusive independent publishing house, Jacaranda Books, and she's one of the Power List top 100, here we go, one of those lists, but hey, I'm happy that you're on it, most influential Black Britons for 3 consecutive years, and the recent winner of Regional Small Press of the Year 2020 at the British Book Awards. So another there again. And Jacaranda is spearheading 20 in 2020, where they are audaciously going to publish 20 Black British authors in 2020, which has never been done before by anybody, okay? And it's a great pleasure to be partnering with Jacaranda on that. Sharmaine Lovegrove, who now resides in Berlin. Are you there now, Sharmaine? Have you been? Yeah. Hopefully that's apple juice.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a glass of wine. It's a publishing thing. I need a glass of wine. Cheers, everyone.
All right. It's publisher of Dialogue Books, the UK's only inclusive imprint, part of Little Brown Book Group and Hachette UK. Dialogue Books is a home for a variety of stories from illuminating voices, often missing from the mainstream. Sharmaine was a recipient of the Future Book Publishing Person of the Year 2018-2019 award, and she was the literary editor of Elle and set up her own bookshop and creative agency when living in Berlin, which is where you are now. Writers that she publishes includes Arunison Okoji. And last but not least, Crystal Mahey-Morgan started as a freelance journalist. Now, this is going to be one of those things where it's like, oh my gosh, one of these sort of early starters, talented ingenues. Freelance journalist at the age of 16, writing for The Guardian and Face magazine. And by 19, she became marketing manager for Raindance Film Festival before embarking on a publishing career, firstly working as a literary assistant at Peter, Fraser and Dunlop, and then joining Random House in 2009. And then 2015, we had the good fortune that she left Penguin at Random House and co-founded Own It with Jason Morgan, her husband, and writers that she published includes JJ Boller and Courtier Newland. Welcome to you all. Now, first question, why did you choose publishing or did it choose you? Crystal.
I chose stories, and part of storytelling, a huge part of storytelling is publishing. So that seemed a very obvious kind of fit. As you mentioned, I feel like I've always told stories. So whether that was when I was marketing manager at Raindance Film Festival and it was about screen or poetry or, you know, that's always been kind of what I do. And publishing, I think, is the originator of so many amazing stories which go on to develop in other media. So to me, I chose it and it chose me is kind of one in the same question. Yeah.
Aimée.
Yeah, I would say something really similar. I never even knew publishing was an option. I've always been like a massive book reader, and when I discovered that I could, you know, make a job and a career out of it, I think that's when publishing chose me, or I chose publishing, as it were. I mean, even with the bookshop, you know, not technically like a part of publishing, but just another avenue to get books out. So yeah, much like Crystal, I kind of came to it and then it came to me, I guess.
Stefan, I can see that on the t-shirt. I chose publishing, yeah. Publishing chose me at the back.
Yeah.
Valerie, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, my path to publishing was slightly different. I never, like Aimée, I had no idea. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, 90s. It was never an option for a black girl growing up in Hackney, like just no. But I was always an avid reader, and also, I used to write a lot, and it was always a thing that sort of got me noticed. And then I moved to California, And I was writing while I was there, and I got published a couple of times, and I thought I wanted to be a writer. But I also had small children as well, 2 small children. So when I came back to the UK, I needed a job. And I definitely wanted to find something that would speak to my love of words and reading and books. And that's something I've always had. And it was just very pragmatic. Like, where's the nearest university that I can get my kids to school and get myself there and back in time that's going to offer me a creative outlet? And it was City University, and they had an MFA in fiction, and they had an MA in publishing studies. And then I was just like, okay, I have children, so I better get something that might actually pay me some money. And so that's how come I went into publishing that way, and learned therefore about the industry of publishing, and sort of started to actually see how I could be a part of it. Very, very late in the game as well. I mean, I was in my late 40s at that point. But yeah, and then, you know, having spent 1 year at a publishing house, realized that it was not going to be for me, you know, to work in mainstream publishing. And my husband and I, we have, in San Diego, we have rehearsal rooms, and we had a recording studio, and we had a venue. So we had already, but that was all to do with his music and his sort of dreams and the things that he was doing. So that's where the energy was focused. But I realized I can do this on my own because I'm familiar with business. But yeah, the aspiration to write is still there. So yeah, I chose publishing specifically. I would have chosen writing, but yeah, then it chose me. I now love it.
Sharmaine.
Hi, I just want to say thanks for having me as well. And also it's really lovely to see all of you, Valerie, Aimée and Crystal as well. Like, it's just a real honor to work alongside you in this industry, and know that there are women of color that are doing this work. It's really hard work, but it's really great work. And I really appreciate everything that you guys have done, and admired your work for a very, very long time. I think my obsession really was just about the kind of that feeling of transformation that storytelling gives you. And I had that from a very young age. And so from the age of 8, I knew that I wanted to work with books, and I didn't really have a plan of how that would happen. I definitely knew I'd open a bookshop, and so moved here to Berlin when I was 27 to be able to do that. And it's interesting that Aimée said, you know, it wasn't part of the publishing industry, because I think that's sort of the problem with the publishing industry, is that it doesn't see itself as connected to all the facets and assets of which connects the story to the reader. And I've been really inspired by what Valerie and Crystal have done. You know, Crystal's events with Own It, I'm always talking about them because of how great they are. And Valerie as an independent publisher, and Aimée was setting up the bookshop. You know, it's something that I did as well. And it's just, I think it does find you and get under your skin, but we're also following a tradition of our ancestors who, as people of colour, have been telling stories and sharing stories for millennia. And the idea that it's still being taken away from us, the ability to tell our stories, is like one of the most shocking things. Our ancestors fought from Africa to the Caribbean and beyond to tell our stories of how we live. And so I just see it as sort of my birthright to do that. And I fight for the right for all of us to be able to tell our stories. So I feel, yeah, it kind of found me as well.
The next question, really. I mean, inclusivity has been bandied about, and publishing, a lot of people are still mystified by what it is in practice. I mean, so what does being an inclusive publisher mean in reality? And what does that look like, you know, from your perspective and experience? So I'll start with Valerie.
I mean, I think it is all about the languaging, isn't it? And sadly, we are still kind of floundering around trying to find the ways in which we talk about ourselves and talk about what we're doing in this country. So whether we're talking about representation or diversity or inclusivity or whatever the label is going to be, we're still trying to find ourselves in this culture and in this place, and to name ourselves. And that's why I think it's quite a difficult thing. For me, I mean, it's sort of representative of who I am, you know, the outlook of somebody that sort of feels like they're on the outside of things trying to get in. You know, you're trying to get a seat at that table. You're trying to get literally the book on that shelf. And so it's trying to find a path in, literally include us, find a way to include us in your narratives, in your stories, in your commerce, and therefore also in our history and in our place in this country. But I think we're always going to be sort of struggling to really fully define, or at least I speak for myself, to really define what it is, because we're still trying to define ourselves in this country. We're still not sure really of our place here. And I mean, I'm talking about somebody who's born here and then left and came back, and you know, I still don't know what it means to be British really, or when you talk about this whole inclusive thing. I don't know. I know I'm over here doing what I'm doing, and if that's inclusive, then yay.
Crystal.
I just echo a lot of what Valerie said. I think what Own It means to define ourselves as a diversity-led or an inclusive-led publisher, and I think a lot of what Valerie says really rings true, that actually I think sometimes language and especially words aren't enough to really kind of speak to the nuance of different experiences. And so for us, we're story-led, and we've always said, you know, others have often said we're diversity-led or we're inclusive, and all of those things, like Valerie said, are true because of who we are and the way we think and who we work with. But for us, these are never words or labels we've attached to Own It ourselves. We always call ourselves a story-led kind of life brand, and that's the only thing we will ever call ourselves. And it's not, we don't take offense to other people putting those kind of words and attaching them to us, because there's a conversation and we need words to have a conversation. I get that, but for us personally, we just don't really enter into that part of the conversation. We just try to do what we do through what we publish and what we represent. And if someone was to ask us, it's always that we're story-led, and that's the only thing that leads us. It just so happens that a lot of the stories we publish or we represent happen to come from what's called diverse backgrounds or inclusive or representation, but that's not the thing that makes us pick those stories. We pick great stories and it just falls where it falls. And I think sometimes people find it difficult to accept that if 90% of your list is kind of from underrepresented groups, that's not part of your remit. But actually that cannot be part of your remit and still be the case, because great stories come from everywhere.
Sharmaine.
So dialogue was born out of the statistic that out of 165,000 books that were published in 2016, less than 100 were by people of colour and only one black male debut was published. And it came out of a conversation the day that that bookseller piece was published, with Philip Jones and Charlie King, who's the MD of Dialogue Books. Sorry, Little Brown, where Dialogue Books resides. And, you know, the thing that was really interesting was, you know, we were in a bar and we just started chatting, and they were like, what would you do about this issue? And I was like, well, you have Virago, which is the feminist imprint that started 40 years ago. And I think you need to make an imprint that just focuses on this, on the situation, basically. And they were like, how would you do that? And I was like, well, so I had no aspiration to become a publisher. It wasn't in my dream. It wasn't my mind's eye. I felt like if I wanted to do that, I would have had to have started as an editorial assistant. So when we were thinking, so it wasn't like this is this big thing that I wanted to do. But what was really interesting from the beginning was that I was like, look, the thing is about diversity is that if you look at its etymology, it's like divided, divorce, like it just means it's the othering. And what I really want to do, which is what white feminism hasn't done, is bring everybody along with me. So I want everybody to be included in that conversation, everybody to be able to tell their stories. And the conversation is a dialogue, hence Dialogue Books. And the inclusivity is so that we publish people from a range of backgrounds that have been marginalized. And if I was in a different time in a different space, then maybe I would be a different kind of publisher that could say I publish everyone, and I might publish cisgendered, heterosexual, white middle class people, but that's not that's not what I'm here to do, because that's what everybody else does within corporate publishing. So my thing is around being absolutely inclusive of those who are marginalized, and not to use the word diversity, because I don't want us to be othered, continue to be othered. I really want us to be in the center.
Aimée.
Yeah, I think jumping off of what Valerie was saying about inclusivity and all of the terms that are kind of running around, it's such a part of like even my own experience, right? So growing up, the friends you have, you know, the people that you see often, you know, we have such a, well, me personally, I have such a wide variety of friends and even family members. And at the time that KO was launched, we felt as though the conversation that was happening in adult publishing around diversity and inclusivity was a whisper, like a really tiny whisper in the kids space. And for me, like I've been in agenting, I've been in the big publishers, the small publishers, and I would go into these rooms and just be like, well, am I on your shelves? Am I in your books? You know, are my friends there? And oftentimes they weren't. And so for us, I think we have chosen to lean into the words that the industry are using, because what wasn't happening in the kids space was the conversation that we were trying to have within the bigger houses. So I was trying to explain the necessity to have, you know, a numerous plethora of diverse stories, and it just wasn't heard, because there was often, I heard, you know, well, we give books to all children and all children can engage with our stories and the authors that we publish. But for me, it was, well, I'm not here, you know, my friends aren't here, like I said. And so we've always chosen to lean into the language at times that we feel appropriate. I mean, there are obvious words we refuse to use. But when it feels necessary for us to lean into the words that the industry uses, we use them, because for a long time, this conversation wasn't happening in the kids space, and it was only happening with, you know, what I call like the OGs in the kids space, which is the Malories and Alex Wheatles, which are amazing. But there wasn't this conversation around how are we bringing in new talent, why do our offices continue to look the same way, and why are we bringing in fresh new talent, often from, you know, black and brown backgrounds, and then finding they only stay with us for 1 or 2 years until we've run them ragged and run them dry, and then they disappear. So KO, you know, marks its stand as being an inclusive kids publisher that hires diversely, because to other people, us saying that we publish all stories doesn't mean anything to them, because their perception of what all stories are is really different to what our perception of all stories are. And even having to explain to people that for us, diversity isn't just race, you know, being a black-led publisher, they just see diversity as, oh, so you just publish black stories. And I mean, to this day, I still get people saying, oh, so it's just for black kids, then it's just for black authors. And to even like bring in something like disability or gender, they're like, oh yeah, I didn't even think that's what you would mean by that. So there's still like a dissonance between, you know, what our version of storytelling is and what the world still sees as diverse publishing.
I mean, in different ways, you know, you've all talked about storytelling, but also talent, and I think writer development as well, because I know you're all passionate about writers. It's not just about you churning out books. There's a whole sort of curation and nurturing and cultivation that goes on. So what attracts you to a writer and or a story that makes you think this has to be in the world? Valerie?
I mean, I think for us, that is still a little bit of a luxury. And that's, so to qualify that, there is discernment in terms of the books that we publish, of course. But I think in terms of our mission and what we kind of see as the space that we hold for specifically Black British writers, but also, you know, on a more global level, because we publish from around the globe, we are not necessarily sitting back, you know, saying, oh, it has to be the biggest, the brightest, the brightest, the best ever book to be published. What we want to do is to create an opportunity for somebody to grow. And actually, the minute you, so again, the terminology, it's really important to kind of just swirl around in it for a bit, because, you know, one of the things that we were talking about when we started was that we weren't going to call ourselves Black publishers. But actually, when we sat down and called ourselves Black publishers, the world opened up. It didn't shrink. It opened up because there's so much uniqueness within that framework. And so likewise, when we set ourselves out to publish Black voices, it's just like this enormous array of talent came our way. And some of it was very debut, and some of it was already established, and some of them, you know, couldn't get published anywhere else, so they came to us, and other people specifically wanted Jacaranda to publish them. And so we have had such a rich array of an experience as a publisher by just putting ourselves out there for these voices. And so the idea that we want to sit, and I think it's an important subject, I think, for us as publishers, because once you see our skin color and once you see the skin color of the sort of breadth of our publishing, there immediately becomes this question of standards and quality and all of this kind of stuff drawn onto what you're doing. And I just completely reject that and say, you know, we're here for it all. We're here for the good, the bad, and the ugly, until we can build ourselves, you know, kind of which is what we're all doing here, this publishing sort of milieu in this country that you can pick and choose from. You can get whatever you need from it. And it might all be Black, but it's vastly different. So I don't know if I answered the question, but it's not something that we sit down and say, oh, you know, the writing, which of course we still do, but, you know, it has to be a particular voice and a particular style of writing and a particular person. It's not that. It's, you know, this author has written this book and they've never been edited by anyone and no one's ever read their work, but there's something in there, we're going to go for it. And then they get exposed to the publishing process and it blows their mind and the education begins. And so there's all sorts of stuff happening when we're publishing books of Jacaranda, literally all sorts of things. As well as, you know, every once in a while I'll get a Bernice McFadden or, you know, Trayvon Martin or some amazing book that come fully formed, and then all I need to do is publish it, you know. So.
But when you think, with all of you, I mean, when you think about the hit rate in terms of books that are published by writers of colour and how successful they are being, the hit rate is pretty high. Aimée, what is it for you? Because I mean, you know, when I go into your shop and seen all these books there, you know, and it's one of the most buoyant markets, you know, the kids market. So.
Yeah, if you take like Shana, for example, who, like you said, has just won the Waterstones Prize, she was somebody that came to us through like our unsolicited submissions, and she, you know, she did a bit of like non-fiction, so she's worked for the Tate and done curation over there, so she's done some non-fiction titles but never really written anything in the fiction space. And she sat down with David and I was like, oh, I've just got this idea that's like knocking around in my head. And, you know, it was one of those conversations where you see like little hints of like, oh, there might be something here. And she mentioned the bare bones of what High Rise is. And I just think of her journey from sitting across, you know, that coffee table with her to where she is now. Like, all that's ever mattered to us is the fact that she was like, I just see 2 young Black girls, detective, murder mystery, South London. And that, for me, I was already sold. Like, South London, I was like, yeah, I'm in. Like, what more do I need? But yeah, again, I don't know if I'm answering the question, but it's just her obsession with getting a story out and seeing a world, you know, becoming created and putting it on the page is what made us fall in love with her, right? She didn't really want, and still doesn't probably enjoy, all of the shine and all of the glamour and the glitz that publishing and the awards, which she's grateful for, but that's not what she came in it for. She came in it because she had like this amazing story in her mind that was literally, you know, itching at her, like itching under her skin that she had to get out. And we fell in love with that first and foremost. And when we look for stories, or when stories come to us, there is no prescription, there is no like, this has to have this, that, and the third, because publishing stories, though, it's also subjective, and what I love you may not love, but if there's a voice in there which I think everyone needs to hear, regardless of if it's a genre or not, that I, you know, it could be horror, it could be sci-fi, which I still haven't found, but could learn to love. If there's a voice in there that is like itching to get out, we will put it out.
Crystal, I mean, you cover music as well. Valerie, sorry, can I ask you to put your mic on mute just for now, because I can hear your lovely dog, I think. Yeah.
Oh, no, it's not mine.
It's not yours. It's Aimée.
Neighbours.
Sorry. Okay.
Neighbours. Sorry.
Oh, okay. That's why I know, because I know you've got a gorgeous dog. So no, it's fine. It's fine. That's great. Thank you, Crystal.
I think it's just very similar to what's been said. I think, like, as editors, it's very subjective, which is why we need editors from really wide kind of backgrounds and thinkers. And so it's very subjective. It's often an instinct, and it's often something that I feel so passionately about and can't stop thinking about. And it's just, you know, and then there's obviously, we're all businesses, so there's always a business conversation as well, especially as independents. I think often people kind of are aware of the great work we do in terms of what we put out, but forget the fact that we also run as businesses on very kind of low budgets and need to be very commercially viable and savvy. So there's always a business question, but for us, it's probably the way we build our P&Ls are very different to the way mainstream publishing builds them. So Sharmaine mentioned earlier that one of the things Dialogue was born out of was that article which mentioned the only Black British debut male novelist in 2016. That was actually the first novel that we published as Own It. It was called Mama Can't Raise No Man by Robin Travis. And honestly speaking, on a P&L in a mainstream publishing house, I can't see that they would feel that that would really do numbers. But actually, because we have such a different approach in building and finding audiences, for us, that commercial conversation looked very different. So it's always a commercial kind of decision. It's always a creative, passionate decision. And then similar to what Val and Aimée said, it's also about, is this a voice that is universal, but also putting something out in the world that maybe we're not hearing enough of, or is going to create empathy or going to change the world in some ways. And, you know, similar to Aimée, yes, sometimes that's to do with race, but that's not the extent of representation, diversity, inclusion. It's also about class. It's also about neurodiversity, disability, gender, sexuality, like all of these things. And so all of these conversations come in play when we're deciding what we can and can't take on. And I think, like probably everyone, there's so much more we wish we could take on that we simply can't. So it's never a lack of talent out there, which is sometimes the message that gets put out. That's just not the case. Like, there's too much talent, an abundance of talent, and probably not enough us's, Amy's, Val's, Sharmaine's, you know, that's where the problem lies.
But that was reinforced in the Rethinking Diversity in Publish report by, you know, Dr. Onamik Saha and Dr. Sandra Valento, isn't it? The fact that traditional publishers, they mainly chase the white middle class reader, and they don't value audiences, Black and other audiences of colour. So that, you know, the hole that you are trying to fill and the space that you're occupying is huge in terms of the absence, not absence of talent, but the absence of talent search, even leaving their buildings to actually go out amongst the people and find out what stories exist in the diverse communities. I mean, so I'll come to you, Sharmaine, because you're straddling, you know, a traditional publisher, and you know, you're running an imprint. So what is it? Because I mean, obviously, like for example, Irenis and Koji started off at Jacaranda, is now with you. So that's great in terms of that ecosystem, that trajectory. But yeah, you know, in terms of the question, you know, in terms of attracting you to an author, the story, a combination of both.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's really interesting is that for me, my experience of being a bookshop owner and having worked in bookshop for 20 years wasn't considered the right experience to become a publisher. And what I had to face when I started my job was a load of people saying to me, how can she do it? Why are you going to, you know, you're definitely, like, I mean, I can't imagine someone starting a job and that you've never met and telling them that they're going to fail. Like, it was just such a bizarre thing, like people seeing me at a party being like, oh, I heard about your job. It starts in a couple of months, really exciting. But, you know, I just don't see how it's going to possibly work. And you're just like, who does that? But a lot of people, because that's what publishing is like. And, you know, it's no coincidence that I've moved further and further away. After 6 months, I moved to Bristol, and then now I'm living in Berlin, because actually that kind of, the thing that I said at the beginning is still the thing that I'm the most interested in, is that transformatory experience that the reader has. And because that's been my starting point from working in bookshops from 16, when I'm coming to a book, I'm thinking, how will I sell it? How would I speak about it in a bookshop? How would I sell it to my customers? What event would I put on in Berlin? What event would I put on in London? Like, as a publicist, so I'm thinking all of these things around what I would do when I'm reading. I also had the first company that found books that could be adapted into film and television. So I'm also thinking, could this translate to screen? So when I'm reading, I'm sort of doing lots of different things, and that's the intersection of like the commercial with the arts, and that's what the independent publishers are doing as well. So it's almost like I'm just thinking about the many different options and myriad options for a narrative, and so it is having to work quite hard, but then the joy of when you acquire it and it gets to readers and people actually understand it and see that text come to life, is the most amazing feeling. And so on my initial reading, each manuscript I am probably trying to do a lot more than other editors are trying to do with it, because I'm bringing a body of experience, but I'm also bringing a wealth of experience from being a bookseller. And I can never not see the range of different readers that I would sell a book to. And I think that's quite a distinctive experience to most people in publishing who have kind of come through a corporate side and just work their way up. And so I work a lot more like the independents who are really business savvy. Like Crystal said, like Valerie, it's amazing with Aimée, with the bookshop, just really business savvy as well as being creative. And I think that the corporatization of the arts is actually one of the worst things to happen to publishing. And I think that's why the independents and the independent-minded women that we have here are kind of, to me, at the core of the publishing industry, because it's always about that intersection. By the way, this is Jackson, my 8-year-old.
Hi, Jackson. Hi, good
just
to see
learning
you.
about publishing.
There's some questions, so I'm going to move over to those in a minute. But I just wanted to sort of jump onto your point, Sharmaine, because I think that what strikes me about all of you, and particularly Crystal, Aimée, and Valerie, it's almost like you were startups. It's almost like it's that entrepreneurial journey as an entrepreneur, creative, entrepreneur. So I think even business, it sounds like a limiting model for you, because the fact that, Crystal, you do contracts, you negotiate TV deals, which I know you've had to think about, Valerie, as well. Online retailer, running a bookshop, constantly diversifying and being creative in your thinking. So it's not just commercial, there's a creativity underpinning everything that you do. And I mean, and you seem to be juggling that pretty well. And I just want to move over now to some of the questions. So Bina asks, do you only accept submissions via agents? Anyone wants to answer that?
So I'm just going to say that I used to be super open to accepting submissions from everyone, and not from agents. And actually Paul Mendes, who wrote Rainbow Milk, who we've had a great time with this year, he came to my inbox the first day of my job. But it has been really difficult to accept submissions over the last couple of years, partly because when people are writing to me, they often foreground their emails with all of the issues of publishing. And so they'll tell me why publishing is like a terrible industry that's really racist and how awful it is. And then they'll tell me that like I'm a beacon of hope for them as a Black woman that will publish their book. And then at some point, I'm like, where's the story? And I'm like, by the way, you wouldn't go to a job interview, you wouldn't write a cover letter for a job telling them that you've been turned down for like 10 jobs and like, I must give you a job because you've got your mortgage to pay. It's like, and so it's become harder to kind of accept open submissions, because then what happens is that if I reject something, then I get told that I'm not doing enough for the community. I'm not really like the Black woman that I've said that I am. Like, it becomes really personally offensive to me. And I'm like, do you know what? Agents, don't talk to me like that. Don't have this expectation. You know, if I don't get back to someone in a week, they're just like, I've emailed you a week ago and you haven't got back to me, hadn't read my manuscript. And so I really want people to know that, like, I'm so here for the cause. It hurts so hard that, like, the judgment that comes with accepting open submissions when they're not, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you guys have this as well, but I find it so deeply upsetting to when I have to turn something down with someone that doesn't have an agent, that it makes me want to close that door, but also I can't quite close it because that's not who I am. So I'd love to know how everyone else manages that process.
Crystal?
I think the beauty of what's happening here is that we're all very different and our approaches are very different, and neither one is right or wrong. Nobody's got the answer. So for us, you know, literally with the 20 in 2020, that was an open call for submissions. You know, we had to do it that way. But we also work with agents as well. I just don't think there's a right or wrong way. It's just how the books come to you. And because it's so hard and it's so, like, intensive what we're doing, you know, I fully, you know, bat away anyone who wants to criticize you because you're not going to publish them because they're Black and you're Black. You know, it's like, that's just not fair. You know, it's not fair. It's hard enough. I just think so. For us, we do a combination of things. We definitely have open call for submissions. We have the so-called slush pile. We deal with agents and we buy in from publishers. We do everything that we can within the remit of our small press, with all of the challenges on our resources that entails, to try and bring books to, you know, publication. And it's still not good enough for a lot of people, but it's what we do, you know. So, you know, there's just no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, we do both as well. I mean, in the beginning, agents didn't trust us, so we were literally seeing nothing from them. They were like, who is this new indie startup? We're not going to send them any of our authors. And to be quite fair, they didn't really have any of the authors that we were looking for either. So we've always had open submissions from the start. We take buy-ins, and now agents are a little more trusting of us, and they kind of know the taste of our lists, that we have great relationships with them as well. But the question we always get asked is, you know, what are you doing? And I do feel as though it's us that gets, you know, put the responsibility of, like, what are you doing to find new voices? And I think there is something to be said about independent publishers being expected to do more to find voices compared to, like, the bigger houses, because it's often us who are like, so how are you, you know, finding new authors? What are you doing to interact and engage with community? And we've got every door we can have open. But I think there is something to be said for the fact that the bigger houses, I don't think, are getting asked these same strong questions as us.
Crystal, anything you want to add?
We also do both. So Own It, within Own It, there's Own It Publishing and there's Own It Agency, and it's through the agency that we kind of negotiate book deals for authors we represent, where we sell on to the mainstream bigger publishers and the film and TV deals. So for us, it's really across the board. I think we will never not accept, like, unsolicited or stuff that's not agented, because, you know, going back to our first ever book, which was the only Black British debut male novelist in 2016, that's an author that probably wouldn't know how to go through the process of finding an agent. And even if some authors do, it doesn't necessarily mean that the agents are going to recognise the talent or understand how to work with those authors then to be able to sell them on to publishers. So I think knowing that that's a gap and that's a problem with the industry, for us, we would never not accept unsolicited, kind of unagented material, because that's kind of why we exist, to kind of fill a gap and to find a solution for something that's not currently working. And there's just great stories that come in that way. But to echo what everyone says, it's difficult. There's a lot of pressure placed on us, especially when you're an independent and you're a small team. You don't have readers, you don't, you know, have, like, assistants helping you with all of the other stuff you've got to do of running the business. And then,
I don't have that either.
But I mean, we like, and you know, you're doing amazing, and in so many ways you run like an independent, but as an independent, you don't have a sales team, you don't have a publicist, you have a marketing team, you literally have you and your core team, and you have to be the CEO, you have to be the CFO, you have to be the editor, you have to be the production manager, you know, you have to do all of those things. And that's a reality of running an independent, and which makes it sometimes very difficult just to get to the bit of reading submissions. So it's difficult, but I think it's something we will always do and never stop.
Right, now we've got about 15 minutes, and before we wind up, and I know Crystal has to, I have to say this, take a call from New York. So what I'm going to ask is if you could, you know, not all of you necessarily have to respond to the rest of the questions, or if they could be slightly shorter so we can get through quite a few of them, because there's some good ones here. Just really quickly, from Sandra, do you accept short story collections?
Yeah, I published 4, so yes.
Likewise, yes.
Yes.
It's not something, short stories and kids' books, tricky. So it would have to be, yeah, it would have to be amazing. And that's not in like the writing would have to be amazing, but it would have to be something new and fresh.
That's an interesting point, you know, when you think about it. It's like, yeah, you'd think, allegedly with our attention span, children's attention span, short stories would make sense. But yeah, that's an interesting point. After all the talk of Black Lives Matter, do you think that the major publishing houses are going to be hearing me about having a truncated, you know, succinct answers to this huge question now? Do you think that major publishing houses are going to be more open to diverse stories, as they say they will? Or do you think they'll back off once, you know, the hype dies down? Anybody?
So I can take this on setting up the Black Writers Guild. So that was set up with Nels Abbey and Afua Hirsch. And I'm one of the organisers alongside Simeon Brown and Derek Owosu. And we have 250 members now. And basically there was a letter that was written on behalf of the members that was sent to all the big corporate publishers. And over the last 2 weeks, there's been meetings with all of those publishers. And it's been an incredible response. There are 8 requests from increasing, basically, if you look it up on The Guardian, or you look it up, if you Google like the Black Writers Guild, then there's a website, and if you Google, and you can see the letter, and that letter has a lot of demands, and there are going to be changes, and we're going to create a kind of a gold standard of what it looks like for Black people within the industry. And the thing that we've been very clear about is that we're not talking about Black, Asian, minority, ethnic people. We are talking specifically around Black people, because that's where the biggest discrepancy is within the publishing industry. So that's the shortest. Also mixed race people, Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, we're in a climate now where, you know, authors have put their neck above the parapet, because obviously, you know, Black Writers Guild came on the back of Dorothy Coomson's open letter, where she stuck her neck out on her own to say about how, you know, the hostile environment in publishing, and she's been involved, you know, in publishing for a long time. So I think that, you know, obviously that's you know, a positive development.
I would like to add that I would love to see the conversation not move, but happen within the office as well as the output, because I think there's a lot to be said for, we want these great, amazing Black voices, but who's looking after them in-house?
So that's part of the request of the letter, is that it's that we're saying we want to see commissioners, we want to see ring-fenced marketing funds, we want to see Black people in sales, we want to see Black people in all levels of publishing, all the way, and mixed race people from all across, thank you, Jackson, across all areas of the industry, in order to help facilitate and enhance the experience of Black people, Black writers. So it's the pendulum, like it's both ways, and to be fully inclusive.
Yeah.
I think it's really important in these conversations that it's not just publishing Black writers, and it's not just having Black workforces. It's about, once you're doing those things, or once you have those staff, where is the support, and what spaces are they then like operating? I think if the conversation is just about having more people that you employ and putting them in those roles, or publishing more books by Black authors, and that's where the conversation ends, that also can be unhealthy for those people working in those environments, and unhealthy for those authors' careers. So like, I personally have no confidence in any of these conversations, and I think as an agent who is dealing with the major publishing houses all the time, dealing with staff members, like representing authors, there's a lot of rhetoric at the moment, and that's not kind of, the dots are not marrying up to the everyday experiences of either writers or staff within these kind of environments, you know. And I think the conversation needs to happen, but I think the rhetoric needs to move away from just that. And I think part of that problem is all of this is about public output, what people are saying publicly, what is being seen to be done, what is going to make the change is what no one sees. The conversations that are not public, the actions that are taken that are not going to be praised or credited or criticised, the things that happen behind the closed doors. And the problem is, when there's not real intention or motivation, those behind the closed doors conversations aren't actually happening. So it's very difficult to feel like there's going to be long-term sustained change beyond a moment.
I can definitely say for Hachette, that's something that, being so involved in it, that I can feel how that change has happened, from the difference from what it was like when I first got there to what it's like now. And that internal conversation to make that space has been really productive, but we've still got an incredibly long way to go, but we were starting in like a 0.01%. So it's like, I totally understand all cynicism, and maybe because I never worked in a publishing house before, and because I'm just really interested in change and I love change. So I'm like really push for change all the time. But I think something shifted from all the conversations that have happened before in the last few months. And I've seen that I've really seen that in the last few weeks, but only time will tell. And also the accountability and creating a structure of accountability is really what we'll be able to tell the future.
Okay, before I move on, I have to obviously step in and just quickly say, ultimately, I think people need to hear publishers use the terminology interpersonal and systemic racism, because unless these things are outed, and unless they come out of their ivory towers and engage in these discussions, it's always going to be opaque, which is a accusation leveled at the criticism leveled at traditional publishers. So the thing is that they need to catch up to the discussion, which is about how you dismantle decades and if not centuries of systemic and interpersonal racism. And I think hearing publishers actually engage in those debates, which we haven't, will, I think, then engage people and writers in a different way in terms of confidence of change happening. But I'm going to move on to the questions now. So I'm going to go back to one now that I think you can respond much more quickly to. And one, would you consider authors of colour from Canada?
Yes.
Right.
I have two that I'm publishing in September.
Fantastic. So do debut writers, both of fiction and non-fiction, need to have a completed manuscript before you remotely engage with them?
For me, yes.
I mean, you can tell I've embroidered that question, but yeah. Yes, to Aimée, Crystal?
Mostly yes, but there may be exceptions, but mostly yes.
If it's non-fiction, it can be a proposal, but if you're writing a novel, it doesn't matter if it's badly finished, but finish it. Just have it complete.
And there's a really good question, but I know it's going to be long. Sorry, Makeda, great question. I'm going to have to move on because there's no way they're going to be able to answer that in about 8 minutes with the rest. But the importance of libraries and needing holistic spaces. Publishers being more connected to community organisations and libraries and so on. And because that's where a lot of stories are housed. So yeah, vital. Right, okay, so you've answered some of the other questions around Black Lives Matter and publishers and commitment in your terms. Here we go, yeah, again. So What resources, is there anything or any opportunities or resources that you feel writers of colours need to be engaging with and they may not know much about, although they're not exploring enough? So that may link back to what you were saying, Sharmaine, about some of those who approach you and you have to say no to. So are there any common things that are coming out?
I think understanding the process. So reading books or going online and understanding what is actually the entire process. How long does it take? What's the kind of expectations? Kind of having a knowledge around that. And you know, ironically, I always think that everything is around reading. The more you read, the better writer you are. The more you read around the industry and what you're trying to get into, then the more understanding you have about what some of the expected outcomes are. I think it's very helpful to not always censor your protected characteristic and really believe in your work, and that your work should come absolutely first and foremost.
Yeah, I agree with everything Sharmaine said, but also to be really specific when it comes to submitting to whatever house you choose, there's a lot to be said for reading their guidelines. We get a lot, I mean, just one, we had a white middle-aged guy from Scotland who was like, my story is diverse and my voice is not heard. And, you know, we often ask, we put whoever comes to us to the test almost to be like, what makes this a story that we have to tell us specifically? So do your research on the publisher and know why you would be a good fit there, but also just read submission guidelines because that would be really helpful.
Someone's asking about, I love this, do you know of agents who are considering submissions? I think most agents are considering submissions. We did something called Meet the Agents last week and we had Elise Stillsworth, Emma Patterson and Davinia Andrew Lynch. So that recording will be out in about a week or 2 weeks' time. So it'd be worth your while taking a look at that to understand how the most important thing is for agents. One of the most important things is discoverability. So it's about what are you doing to make yourself visible and your stories visible and your genre and your interest. So it's about the work you need to do first. But yeah, that will be out soon. Question, obviously you're indie publishing, but you know, is a self-publishing route a better option to get your voice heard? And what is a sensible first print run number?
So I've published someone that's self-published, and he did really well in self-publishing. Then he told me, as a self-publisher also, he told me about his book. I was introduced to him by Courtier Newland actually, and really loved his book, and I published it at Hachette. So, you know, there are no rules. Like if you really feel as though your story needs to be told and no one's listening, then that is a route that you can take, and it won't affect the future of your writing career. And so I definitely feel like it's something that should be that can be looked at, but what you really need to ensure is that you understand audience and how to engage with readers. It's not that you can just kind of publish something and let it just kind of sit there and then say what happened. Like you actually need to sort of look at how social media, author engagement, etc. works to ensure that your book is and that it looks as much like a book that's published by a publishing house, whether that independent or or by a publishing house, as possible.
And just really quickly, Sharmaine, questions come up a couple of times. How does a writer join the Black Writers Guild? So
if you go to the blackwritersguild.com on the and write to hello@blackwritersguild.com, you can email and join. And do you have to be a published writer, author, to join? No. Okay, great. Okay. You need to be someone that is writing, aspiring to writing, being published, be interested in the industry. Because if you're not, then like I wouldn't join like a gardening forum, for example. So. Okay, my son just said he would. But, but you need to be someone interested in writing. At the moment, Jackson's also got his own questions, but I've sidestepped them because I think, this is, I don't want his head to get too big.
But basically, I think he should have his own podcast or show based from the comments. So, you know, that's another commercial option there for you, Sharmaine. Just really quickly, just any piece of advice you'd like to offer. I think, but not so much for writers, but for anyone who inadvertently is thinking about, or is thinking about being a publisher.
I would say this, that when I started Jacaranda, there was like a mountain of things that I did not know about publishing, even though I had done this course and I'd worked at publisher. There's still a lot that you don't know about, and I had to go and find it out. So I think they just have to be very proactive about seeking out information about the industry, learn about the industry, how it works, learn about business, number one. If you're going to become a publishing house and you want to publish, you have a publishing program, you know, if you want to publish 2 books a year, by all means do that and go to the Arts Council. That's a different kind of publishing than if you want to have a commercially viable operation. And you need to educate yourself. And I literally had to. So I think it's important not to just think that because we've all done it, that we're the oracle and we have all the answers, but that the answers are out there, and the same way that we found them, you can also find them, is what I would say to that.
Anyone else?
I would add, be prepared to be questioned daily, weekly, about the why of what you're doing, and know firmly why you exist and what for and who for. And also, like Valerie said, you know, we don't have all the answers. I think I am here in large part because of all of the others I spoke to when I first came in. I'm talking Rosemary Hudson, Verna Wilkins, who to this day I can still pick up the phone and call if I have any questions. The women who have been leading the way long before I even knew how to read. So definitely, if you can, talk to those who have come before you and learn from them just as much as we're still learning.
And just really quickly, one question, because it's come up back twice. So, okay. How can a publisher help to extend visibility within the UK to the United States? So especially for a US writer. So US writer based here, but wants to be visible in the US market. Anybody?
I mean, so rights, that's right. So rights are sold either UK and Commonwealth, usually excluding Canada because it's North America, or they're sold sort of North American rights. So when you're selling your book, then if someone has got like UK and Commonwealth rights, then we're just focused on publishing in that region, and then it's a different region, and so then you need to find another publisher that will publish you in America. Usually you want to have them published quite close together. If you've got a US publisher and a UK publisher, it's quite good to publish quite close together so that all the media that comes from your UK publication or from your US publication, that they kind of help each other. And so there's kind of a bubble around your book of just loudness. So readers are hearing from you both here and there.
Look, thank you all so much for your great questions, but especially we have to thank our panel, Crystal, Aimée, Valerie, Sharmaine. Thank you for your time. Good luck. You're doing amazing work. I don't want to say work, it's like a mission, and you're visionaries and you're important and you're valued. So look, thank you all so much. And just to those who've joined us today, thanks for taking the time out on a Thursday evening. And just to alert you that we are tomorrow announcing the launch of the Take Flight Hub podcast series with award-winning writers around how to adapt your book, or how to, how you manage optioning and so on around having your book adapted, or how you go about adapting someone else's book. So the recordings from the other webinars, from the events that we've hosted, will also be available. So once again, thanks to our panel. Still will clap. I'm not going to give that up in this space. And yeah, have a great weekend when it comes. And thank you all for joining us. All right, take care. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks everybody.